In 1922, 6 people were murdered on a remote German farm. The disturbing part isn't the murders. It's that the killer had been living inside their house and stayed for days afterward. In the spring of 1922, a farmer in rural Bavaria told his neighbors something strange. He'd found footprints in the fresh snow, a single set of tracks leading from the dark edge of the forest to his farmhouse. There were no tracks leading back. He searched the property, nothing. But in the days that followed, small things kept happening. The house keys vanished. A newspaper appeared that no one in the family had bought. And at night, the family heard footsteps overhead, slow, deliberate movement in the attic. The farmer never called the police. 6 months later, all 6 people living on that farm were dead, killed one by one, in the dark, with a tool taken from their own barn. And the evidence suggests the killer didn't flee afterward. The killer stayed, for days, eating their food, feeding their animals, sleeping under their roof, with the bodies stacked in the barn. This is the case file on Hinterkaifeck, one of the most disturbing unsolved crimes in European history. Hinterkaifeck wasn't a town. It was a single remote farmstead about 70 kilometers north of Munich, sitting between 2 small villages, half hidden by the woods. The nearest neighbors were far enough away that nothing that happened there could be heard. 6 people lived on the farm. Andreas Gruber, 63, the patriarch, known in the area as unpleasant, violent, and universally disliked. His wife Cäzilia, 72, their widowed daughter Viktoria, 35, Viktoria's 2 children, Cäzilia, 7, and little Josef, just 2 years old. And a newly hired maid, Maria Baumgartner, 44. One detail belongs in the file right away, because it shaped everything investigators thought afterward. The family had a dark reputation. Andreas and his daughter Viktoria had been convicted years earlier of an incestuous relationship, a public scandal in a small Catholic farming community. Many locals whispered that little Joseph was not the son of Viktoria's dead husband, or of the neighbor rumored to be involved with her, but of Andreas himself. This was a family other people avoided, which meant that when they stopped appearing in the village, it took a while for anyone to care. Now, the timeline of the 6 months before the murders, because this is where the case stops being a crime story and starts feeling like a haunting. Months earlier, the previous maid had quit. Her stated reason: the house was haunted. She heard footsteps and voices in the attic. The family dismissed it. Then, in the days just before the murders, Andreas Gruber found that strange single track of footprints in the snow running from the forest to the farm, with no return trail. He searched the machine house and the barn. He found nothing. But he also reportedly found the barn door lock broken. He heard footsteps in the attic. He went up with the lantern. Empty. The house keys disappeared and were never found. A newspaper turned up on the property that nobody in the household had purchased, later traced to a reader in a nearby town, but never definitively explained. Andreas told several people in the village about all of this. He treated it almost as a curiosity, something to chat about. He refused suggestions to report it. On Friday, March 31, 1922, the new maid, Maria Baumgartner, arrived at the farm to start her job. Her sister dropped her off and left. Maria had been in the house only a few hours when it began. Investigators later reconstructed the sequence from the positions of the bodies, and it is uniquely cold-blooded. Someone, in the evening or night of March 31st, lured the family members into the barn, one at a time: Andreas, then his wife, then Viktoria, then 7-year-old Cäzilia. Each one walked into the dark barn, probably to check on a noise, and was struck down with a mattock, a heavy pick-like farm tool. As each victim fell, their body was covered with hay, and the killer waited in the darkness for the next person to come looking. 4 times, 4 separate people walked into that barn, and the killer stood in the dark, patient, and waited. Then the killer entered the house. In her small bedchamber, the maid Maria Baumgartner, on her first night of work, was killed in her bed. Finally, the killer went to Viktoria's room, where 2-year-old Joseph lay in his crib, and killed him too. There is one detail from the autopsy that investigators never released to the public at the time, because it was too disturbing. 7-year-old Cäzilia did not die immediately. The evidence indicated she survived, lying in the hay beside her family, for possibly several hours before she passed. Add safety note: this is the softened version. Do not add graphic detail about her final hours. The historical record includes more, but describing it risks limited monetization under YouTube's shocking content involving minors standard. This phrasing keeps the emotional weight and stays advertiser-friendly. The murders are only half of this case. What happened over the next 4 days is the reason it's still famous a century later. Here is what separates Hinterkaifeck from almost every other murder case in the record. The bodies weren't discovered until April 4th, 4 days later. And during those 4 days, the farm did not look abandoned. Neighbors saw smoke rising from the chimney over the weekend. The farm's livestock had been fed and watered. The cattle were calm and cared for. Food had been eaten from the kitchen. The family dog, which a passing mechanic found tied up in the barn on Saturday, had been moved and retied by the time the bodies were found. Someone was living at Hinterkaifeck with 6 corpses on the property, cooking meals, tending animals, sleeping in the house, and behaving so normally that a mechanic, who came to repair a machine on April 4th, spent hours on the farm and noticed nothing wrong until the bodies were found in the barn. And when investigators finally arrived, they confirmed what the evidence implied. Nothing of significant value was missing. Large amounts of money were found in the house. Robbery, the default explanation for a farmhouse massacre, made no sense. Whoever did this didn't come for money. They came for the family. And they were comfortable enough afterward to stay. The investigation, frankly, was a disaster by modern standards. Curious locals trampled the crime scene. The victims' skulls were removed and sent to Munich for examination, and were later lost, reportedly destroyed in the chaos of World War II. The bodies were buried without them. Police interviewed over 100 suspects across the following decades. The main theories in the file: the neighbor, Lorenz Schlittenbauer. He had courted Viktoria and may have believed Josef was his son. Andreas had blocked any marriage and there was bad blood over child support. When the search party found the bodies, Schlittenbauer unstacked the corpses in the barn with strange calm, contaminating the scene, and moved through the property in ways some found too confident, including allegedly knowing his way around despite locked doors. He was investigated repeatedly and never charged. He successfully sued people for calling him the murderer, the dead husband. Viktoria's husband Carl Gabriel had been reported killed in the trenches in 1914, but his body was never recovered. The theory: he came home, discovered the incest, and took revenge. Decades later, after World War II, several returning German prisoners of war claimed Soviet interrogators had encountered a man claiming to be the Hinterkaifeck killer. It was never verified. A stranger in the attic. The footprints from the forest, the noises overhead, the missing keys, the broken lock, all of it suggests someone surveilled the family for days or weeks from inside their own home before the murders. If so, the killer knew the family's routines perfectly. Which explains the barn, the patients, and the 4 days of calm afterward. In 2007, students at the Fürstenfeldbruck Police Academy re-examined the entire case with modern criminological methods. Their conclusion: the case could no longer be definitively solved, but they did settle on a most likely suspect. Out of respect for still living relatives, they never released the name. The farm itself was demolished a year after the murders. During the demolition, workers found the murder weapon, the mattock, hidden in the attic. The attic, the same attic where the footsteps had been heard. It had been searched, and the whole time, the answer was up there. 6 people died at Hinterkaifeck. The warnings were all there. The tracks in the snow, the sounds overhead, the missing keys. Andreas Gruber saw every sign and told his neighbors about them like they were gossip. 100 years later, we know almost everything about what happened at that farm except the only thing that matters. Who was in the attic? Case file closed, but not solved. Subscribe for a new case file every week. And leave your verdict in the comments: the neighbor, the dead husband, or the stranger in the attic.